I am Timm. I'm from Niagara County, New York. I think we're the furthest county away from Vermont, but nonetheless, we're still neighbors. And Niagara County is unique here because we have passed a solar panel local law, and it is an EPR law. So I'll spend a little bit of time just going through our motivation, and how the implementation has been going. So truly, how this local law came about was that we had a local legislator here had a concern about the waste source. And just for some demographics, I can point to Niagara County. We're right here. We have a population of about 210,000 people, and we would characterize ourselves as predominantly rural. The Niagara County has its namesake, wonder of the world, the Niagara Falls. So if you've been here, if you've been to the falls, you've been to Niagara County. So the Niagara County legislature was looking to take proactive steps to eliminate any long-term liability that would come about from having panels. And Niagara County has a pretty ugly environmental history. The Love Canal is in this community. We have, a solid waste incinerator, the Northeast only hazardous waste landfill, multiple solid waste management units. We have, waste from the Manhattan Project. I mean, it's the list goes on and on. Definitely not favorable. Another motivating factor was the amount of projects that are occurring in Niagara County, whether they are, residential grade projects or upwards of 100 or 200 megawatt utility grade solar installations. And a lot of this is influenced by New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. For short, we call it the CLCPA. And it has set forth some pretty lofty goals in the state. And that is 70% renewable energy by 2030, 6,000 megawatts of solar by 2025, and energy storage. One unique component, too, is that this has dramatically sped up the siting and construction for clean projects across New York State. And my apologies for not knowing exactly how Vermont works, but New York had a procedure called Article 10, which allowed the local community to weigh in on large utility-grade projects. The Office of Renewable Energy Services, or ORS, was set up to streamline the siting and construction, and for all intents and purposes had cut out a lot of the local voice and replaced that Article 10 process with 94C, for those that are following New York closely. So, this is overstating the obvious, but solar is growing. We have almost 700 projects totaling 89,000 panels in Niagara County. There are 44 different manufacturers. There are quite a few projects in the pipeline. Residential ones, of course, you're looking at 35 to 45 panels on a roof would satisfy a residential home in Niagara County. We also have 34 commercial projects, and this is primarily your community distributed generation projects, so 5 megawatts or smaller. The New York grid is also identifying 4 large projects, many of which our newly elected governor, or her new term, had announced, and that is the Bear Ridge project, which is right in the heart of Niagara County with 100 megawatts, Somerset, which is on the site of a former coal-fired power plant, an old quarry, and another one in the eastern end of the county. So all in all, the expectation is that, by the conclusion of 2025, Niagara County would have, roughly 4.4 million panels in use and in for installation in Niagara County. That was the motivation behind the law. It was that, that 4.4 to 5 million panels that would be expected for installation and use. And we do know that the lifespan, some will say there's 20, 25 years, depending on what you're reading, you could, see upwards of 30 or 50 years. And, my opinion is really here nor there, but I know what a solar panel looked like 30 years ago. It barely powered my calculator when I was in school. And then I see, I could buy my daughter a backpack with a solar panel on it, and it could power her tablet. So that's evolution, um, and it's respected and understood. And also, I state that as a cornerstone in much of the reason why Niagara County wanted to pursue tackling the waste source before it got out of hand. So we work with the Product Stewardship Institute. I know that you folks in Vermont are very familiar with them. And they helped us draft, with stakeholder input, some best practices from Europe and our local law. We clearly defined the role and responsibility of manufacturers. We sought extensively not to have installers on the hook, for one reason only. Installers live and work in our community, and that was the last group that we wanted to impact with this. So it was manufacturers. The fee for noncompliance is $100 per panel per day. I remember at one point trying to figure out that number, and we wanted it some sharp teeth to gain focus and attention. And then as a means to try to put that into context, there was one 13,000 panel project going in, which is roughly, about an 8 or 9 megawatt project. And I told the county manager here that if they were out of compliance for about a month and a half, that we could wipe out our entire county tax levy. So it certainly has some teeth, and our goal was to just gain attention, certainly not to educate through enforcement. This required on August 1st of 2022, or within 30 days of the first sale of panels, that a stewardship plan has to be submitted. And you're familiar with stewardship plans, but we're looking for that funding mechanism, a description of how hazardous substances are controlled, how they're managed, recovered. We wanted some convenient take-back locations. And looking back on this specific component, there are a lot of warranties on solar panels. And had I been knowledgeable about that, I think we may have tweaked that a little bit. In our rules and regs, we might. The expectation here is that solar panels aren't, they're not like your home computer, right? You're not going to unplug them off your roof and, take them to Lowe's or Home Depot or HHW facility and have them recovered. You might, but it's likely not going to happen because of a warranty. And many of these panels are warranted for, like I said, 15, 20, or 25 years. And we have a energy authority here called NYSERDA, and they handle all of our alternate energy projects in the state. And they have a requirement that a tier 1 panel cannot degrade more than 1% per year for 20 years. So if these panels are 80% efficient on day 1, year 1, day 1 of year 21, they cannot be any less. It can only be 20% less efficient than day 1. We have performance goals requiring 100% recovery, so 1 panel in and 1 panel out by 2026. We're requesting that 85%, or requiring that 85% recycling of the panel itself is achieved by 2031. We looked at Europe a lot, and Europe, based upon how their law was written, had struggled with how much is recycled, and that had a lot to do with what was included. So we'd sought to try to tighten that up a little bit. We ask that the manufacturers provide a sufficient financial reserve and submit us annual reports. Just real quick, and again, not being totally familiar with how Vermont projects work, but there's decommissioning here in New York, and depending on who the project is funded through or by, decommissioning could or could not be required. If you're doing a private land lease, I'm a farmer in a rural community, and leasing 200 acres. That is a business agreement that happens outside of Niagara County. Niagara County has no input in that. And decommissioning may or may not be a priority. What I have seen is that as costs become tighter, profit margins tighten up as well. Decommissioning is one of those things that fall out. So as a means to, again, protect the long-term environmental integrity of our community, we looked to EPR. So decommissioning could very well happen. EPR is almost like a belt and suspenders approach to making sure that the land is restored and the panels are recovered and recycled. There's an abandonment clause too in NYSERDA's law. And again, looking at it from the belt and suspenders approach, if the manufacturer or the producer of these solar panels is on the hook on day one, it makes sure that we do not have any abandoned solar fields, which we actually do have, not a lot, but a few of those projects here in Niagara County. And we do have our implementation challenges with this local law. As you can imagine, being tiny Niagara County in the the most western part of New York State, reaching out internationally is a challenge. To date, we've had one plan submitted, which truthfully is one more plan than I thought we would get. We're doing a tremendous amount of outreach through our installers. And the installers initially were less than enthusiastic about this approach. But as we've worked with our local governments here who are issuing building permits from anything from a residential project up to a 20 megawatt utility grade project, they have become partners in this with us and have shared with those seeking building permits that they need to have their manufacturers on board. So, today I've held 2 calls just today and last week, probably half a dozen calls with various installers looking for information and input. It's instrumental, in my opinion, to have project knowledge at the building permit phase. And I've kind of classified the projects into 2 groups. One is those that are in the queue. These are projects that have been in development, maybe for the last couple of months, siting plans, lease agreements, land has been purchased, things of that nature. Or projects that are, proposed and they're looking to get all the nuts and bolts scraped together. For those projects that are in the queue, we're doing our best to be forgiving and I don't want to say lenient, but to host as many calls as we can and share the intent of the local law. And it's sometimes met with animosity, most times met with animosity by installers, but other times it's positive and productive. We've been called a lot of things in Niagara County here, in related to this project. We've been called anti-solar with this, which is unfortunate because, as I said, with the ugly environmental history that we have here in this community and the plethora of waste that is anticipated, and as green as the industry is, it's a bit of a shame that we're not able to close the loop on this, cradle to grave sort of mentality here with these solar panels. We're working to ensure compliance. Our data that is provided by the state, which is NYSERDA, it tracks quite a bit. It provides us with the panels and the make and model, and afforded us the opportunity to reach out to these international companies. All letters have been sent to the over 40 manufacturers that we have in use in our community, and truthfully, not with the exception of one being LG, others have not responded. A lot of our outreach has gone through the installers and reversing that supply chain. We're working with our local governments at the building permit phase, but the challenge there is that they are not required to enforce our local law. They can certainly advise. And if the community desires to issue a building permit for a project, they certainly can. And then we'll have to take up compliance later on. As a matter of fact, tomorrow on our legislative agenda, we are passing some regulations for this local law that will kind of shore up our enforcement component. It will allow us to issue a notice of violation to the manufacturer for any projects with that the panels are installed, and allow them a specific period of time, an opportunity to appeal. And as a last resort, Niagara County can get an injunction to halt the project, which, getting back to that sharp teeth, we have $100 per panel per day, and then we can ultimately halt the project. It's, it's walking around with that big stick and to be intimidating and say, pay attention to us because of this, but it's certainly not our ambition to have to educate and enforce in that manner. We're just looking for compliance. And that's about a summary of it. So I can certainly stop sharing my screen here, and I'd entertain any questions.
Dawn, hi, it's Mia. I just wanted to ask, were the installers in favor when you were working on this legislation at that point?
That's an excellent question. We held we held one public hearing about the local law, which was required, and had several meetings. And at no point in time did any installer or anyone from the community come out and for or against, at least installers, manufacturers, for or against the local law. We did, however, there's a group I mentioned, the Bear Ridge Project, which is right in the heart of Niagara County. There is a group in that community that opposes the industrial grade or utility grade project going in that community. They were very much vocal in support, which is not a group I'm really looking for support from, but those are the only folks that really had responded.
So they really didn't engage at all of them. Like.
Not at all, but I a lot of that could be size. This is just Niagara County, and as much as we tried to wave our flag of what we're doing here on a global scale, we're just a little pinhole.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It's just interesting to think about, because here in Vermont, the installers who have approached public service and also us. Not all of them, and I don't know that they're necessarily in favor of EPR, but they want a solution for these at end of life too, or the ones they break on the job,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
That's interesting, and from what I'm learning from the warranty period, is that NYSERDA has set requirements that for the first 5 years of a project, that the installer has to warranty the install. That if anything happens, the panel breaks, the wiring's faulty, what have you, they have to repair it on their own nickel. Day one of year 6, they can go back to the manufacturer. And some manufacturers are better than others. Some installers have shared with me, they've got their favorites and they tend to use. What throws a big boondoggle in all of this is that it's about supply chain for some of the smaller projects. And when I say smaller, I'm thinking like a 5 megawatt and in smaller down to your residential or barn panels. They take what's next on the shelf. They're looking, their models are based on what is readily available and not so much on the efficiency of it. Whereas the larger projects, of course, are have many more panels, much more buying power behind them, and it's putting a bit of a burden and a responsibility, an undue responsibility on installers. But the drum we keep beating here is just keep going back to your retailers, your distributors, and whoever, and have them call me, and we can talk, and we can try to sort this out. So what we're seeing is, instead of manufacturers coming to us with plans, it is installers on specific projects saying, can we try this? And what they want to try, and we have yet to approve it yet, is they want to create almost like a stewardship or stewardship organization for the panels for that project that they're installing. And it remains to be seen. The last 5 calls I've had with installers, 4 of them have brought that up. So it's another unique approach where installers who we purposely kept out of responsibility are assuming responsibility so they can continue projects.
Wow. All right, a lot of layers.
Mm-hmm.
And how would they fund those, Dawn? How would the installers fund those product stewardship organizations?
I have yet to see it. However, just this morning's call, the gentleman indicated that it will be part of his decommissioning plan, that instead of just posting a bond for decommissioning, which, like I said, is or is not required depending on the size of the project, that they will post that bond and then build in the requirements of our local law into it, so that the panels would have an adequate funding mechanism to manage them at the end of life, after warranty, and would be transferable. So those are the things that we would look for.
Oh, that's interesting. Is there anybody on virtually that would like to ask the question? John Gilkison has his hand up.
Yes. Thank you, Dawn, for for talking with Vermont today, and thank you, Vermont, for inviting me to participate. I've been working on a stakeholder discussion here in Minnesota with my colleague Amanda Cotton, who couldn't make it today. And Dawn, I've toured Love Canal and other sites, and you know, all of us are responsible for what you have there. We were all buying those products that were made with those things, so we should be sharing the responsibility. Anyways, one question I wanted to ask you, Dawn, is when we are talking with our statewide Solar Energy Association and some national folks who do utilities scale or private large scale stuff around the country, and their allegation is that this was put in place to stop solar installation in Niagara County. And obviously that's not what's happening, but how would you respond to that, and how do you respond to that to dispel that notion and steer it in a different direction, the idea?
No, it's an excellent question, and it's one that I'm often met with, as you can imagine. And to make matters a little bit more complicated for me in implementing this law is that there are individuals within specific communities or even legislators in Niagara County government that may have voted for this that are not necessarily in support of specific projects, whether those projects are in local farm fields. I lost my train of thought for a second. Excuse me for 1 second.
Sure.
All right. I'm sorry. We had local legislators that would speak out against some of the large utility grade projects that were in communities. And ultimately, you know, that's what an installer on a national level will see. And when we're having these meetings with them, that's the first thing they'll say to me. Well, you know, legislator X, Y, and Z or town supervisor, you know, ABC is coming out as anti-solar. My response to that ultimately becomes that's not the intent of the law. The intent of the law is to protect the long-term environmental integrity of our community. And we have the legacy behind us to prove that had EPR laws existed in the first place, we wouldn't be on the hook for places like the Love Canal.
Thanks. That's good. We have very different decommissioning set of requirements and local approvals, so I can't really draw any analogies, but we're trying to, the utility scale is kind of covered through decommissioning requirements, and everything under 50 megawatts is a free-for-all, with individual counties having to make all the decisions for siting and approvals and bonding for removal at end of life. So it's interesting to hear what you have. It's covers you cover a little bit more than we do.
And so you said communities are on the hook for under 50 megawatt.
Communities are totally in charge of
Timm.
approval.
I'm from Niagara County, New York.
And siting requirements.
I think we're the furthest county away from Vermont.
There's no decommissioning framework for solar.
Nonetheless, we're still neighbors.
Interesting. Okay.
And Niagara County,
so the Office of Renewable Energy Services
here takes over
solar
at
panel
25 megawatts local law, and it is an EPR law.
They effectively.
So I'll spend a little bit of time just going through our motivation
and have cut out
and how the implementation
here in New York, the home
has
rule.
been going.
So that Article 10
so truly
procedure,
how this local
had
law
a very storied history of dragging out
We
projects.
had a local legislator
and
here
due to that length of
had a
time, investors weren't
concern
necessarily
about
attracted
the
to
waste
them.
source.
And
And
shortening
just
that
for
up
some demographics, I can point
for
to Niagara County. We're
for a variety
right
of
here.
reasons, but a lot of the
we have a
communities are feeling
population
that
of
they do not
about
have a say.
210,000 people.
We also are right
and
for
we would
offshore wind
characterize
here,
ourselves as
with
predominantly
our
rural.
shoreline along Lake Ontario.
The Niagara County has its namesake,
and becomes a
world,
concern.
The Niagara
So it's kind of like
Falls.
the collision.
If you've been
of,
here, if you've been to the falls, you've been to
the,
Niagara County.
The state's ambitious alternate energy goals.
So the Niagara County
you know,
legislature
the
was looking
put in
to take
place
proactive steps to eliminate any long-term liability.
Through.
And
And then you have communities such as
come
Niagara
about
County,
from having
find residents, you know,
and
on different sides
Niagara
of the
County
fence
has a
with
pretty ugly,
and it's great for some farmers. And
environmental
don't get me wrong,
history.
some
The Love
farmers
Canal is in this community.
are aging and
We
looking
have,
for an opportunity for a
solid
steady
waste
revenue source.
incinerator.
And find that
The
you know, a
Northeast
land lease
only
for solar
hazardous waste
installation
landfill
is far easier.
multiple
than,
solid waste management
you know,
units.
managing
We have
field.
waste from the Manhattan Project. I mean, it's the list goes on and
But
on.
the neighbors don't like it.
Definitely not favorable.
It becomes a vicious circle.
And another motivating
Thanks.
factor was the
Or
the
planting 40
amount
acres
of
of walnuts, that
projects
used to be the
that
other
are
strategy.
occurring in Niagara County, whether they are, residential grade
Anyone else
projects
before we
or
move on?
upwards of 100 or 200 megawatt utility grade solar installations.
Dawn, thank you.
And a lot of
so
this
much for
is
sticking with us
influenced by
and
New York's
changing
Climate
your
Leadership and
schedule around.
Community
Appreciate
Protection
it so
Act.
much.
For
And,
short, we call it the
all
CLCPA.
right, good luck.
And it has
Thank
set
you.
forth
Take
some
care, everybody.
pretty lofty goals in the state, and that is 70% renewable energy by 2030, 6,000 megawatts of solar by 2025, and energy storage. One unique component too is that this has dramatically sped up the siting and construction for clean projects across New York State. And my apologies for not knowing exactly how Vermont works,
I'm Ray Zelke,
but New York had a
correctly,
procedure
Zelke.
called Article 10, which allowed the local
and I
community
work
to
with,
weigh in on
Universal
large
Recycling
utility grade
Technologies,
projects.
URT. We are
The
very
Office of Renewable Energy
involved
Services, or
in the
ORS,
EPR
was set up
electronic
to
waste program there in
streamline
Vermont.
the siting and
And
construction.
we also
And for all
are
intents and
representing
purposes,
LG,
had
who
cut out a lot of
Don
the local voice
mentioned
and
is the
replaced
only
that
company
Article
that's
10
submitted a plan so
process
far to their
with
to the solar
94C
panel EPR program
for
there
those that
in
are
Niagara
following
County.
New York
So
closely.
we are involved. We've had many conversations with Dawn
this
and her
is
team,
overstating
and
the
have been
obvious,
involved
but
in,
solar is
in
growing.
trying to do what
We
we
have
can to
almost
support that
700
law
projects totaling
try and
89,000
get
panels in Niagara
manufacturers
County.
registered to
There are
to be in
44
compliance
different
that she was talking
manufacturers.
about. So
There are
I just want to
quite
take
a
a few
few
minutes,
projects in the
go
pipeline.
through what
Residential
does,
ones, of course,
there's the law
you're
behind
looking at,
it, and there's the reasons
35
that
to
the laws
45
get
panels
passed,
on
but
a
what
roof
actually
would
happens once the
satisfy
solar panel gets
a
collected,
residential home in
and
Niagara County.
what is
We also
URT's
have
process,
34
how do we
commercial
manage that?
projects, and this is
And
primarily
I'm going to talk
your
specifically,
community
obviously,
distributed
about
generation
solar
projects.
panels
So,
here,
5
but what does that look
megawatts
like,
or smaller.
and where do those
The New York
products
grid
go
is
once the
also
solar panels have been
identifying 4
processed?
large projects, many of which
share my
our
screen here.
newly elected governor, or her new term, had
See my
announced,
screen?
and that is
Okay,
the
great.
Bear Ridge project,
Um,
which is right in the heart of Niagara County,
so-
with 100 megawatts. Somerset, which is on the site of a former coal-fired power
There we
plant.
go. So first of all, a
An
little bit
old
about
quarry
URT.
and another one
We were founded in
the eastern end of the
2003 in
county.
Wisconsin.
So all in
Janesville,
all, the
Wisconsin, which
expectation
it's
is
about
that
an hour
you know,
north
by the
and
conclusion of
west
2025,
Chicago area.
Niagara County
On the
would have
Wisconsin side of the
roughly
border.
4.4
we
million
currently operate
panels
5 facilities,
in
one
use
being
and in for
their
installation
local up in New
in
Hampshire, in
Niagara
Dover,
County.
New Hampshire. We also have facilities in Portland,
That was the
Oregon,
motivation
2
behind
facilities in
the law. It
Wisconsin,
was
and one
that
down in Dallas,
4.4
Fort Worth
to
area.
5 million panels
And
that would be
we
expected
primarily in the past have focused
for installation
on
and use.
electronics,
And we
still
do know that the lifespan, some
101
will
million
say there's
pounds in
20, 25
2021
years.
of
Depending
electronics.
on what you're reading, you could
We also
see
do
upwards
some
of
harder
30
to
or 50 years.
recycle items.
And you know, my opinion
and
is
sort and
really
process
here
some
nor
of those
there, but
items
I
depending
know what
on
a solar
they
panel
are,
looked
but
like 30 years
we do
ago.
solar panels.
You know,
we
it
do
barely
universal
powered my
waste,
calculator
lights, lamps, ballasts.
when I was in
we do
school.
some battery sorting.
And then I see, you know, I could
we
buy
don't
my
process
daughter a
batteries
backpack
in
with a solar
house.
panel on it,
We
and
have
it could,
downstream
could power her
processors
tablet.
for those, but we do
So,
sort by
you know, that's
chemistries
evolution,
and ship those off. So
and it's respected and
currently
understood, and
have,
also, you know, I state
just
that
on
as
Friday,
as a
279
cornerstone
employees
in much of the
nationwide
reason why
between the
Niagara
5
County wanted to
facilities.
pursue tackling
So
the
one of the
waste
things
source
that
before it
URT
got out of hand.
has been focused
So
on,
we work with the Product
especially
Stewardship Institute.
since about
I know that you folks
2020,
in Vermont are
is
very
circular
familiar with them.
economy. And
And they helped us
what
draft
really does
with
that mean?
stakeholder
How does
input
that
some best
play
practices from Europe and
into
our local law.
electronics and solar
We
panels and
clearly
other items
defined the
that we
role
handle
and responsibility of
process?
manufacturers.
And
We
I
sought
think one of the
extensively
important
not
things
to
know from a
not to
circular
have
economy
installers
standpoint
on
is
the
that
hook.
circular
For
economy
one
does
reason only,
not
you know, installers
simply mean
live
recycle.
and work in our community, and that was the
I
last
think
group that
those
really
two
wanted
get
to
tied
impact with
together
this.
as
So it
being
was manufacturers.
synonymous in many
The fee for
circles,
noncompliance is
and
$100
it's
per
not.
panel per day.
Circular economy
And
really
I
is
remember at one
from
point
cradle to grave,
trying
back
to
to cradle.
figure out that
And
number,
what does
and
that
we
commodity,
wanted it
whatever
sharp,
that commodity
some sharp
might be,
teeth
whether it's plastic or
to gain
gold
focus
or
and
silver,
attention.
copper.
And then
what-
as a
what
means
happens
to
that
try to
product
put
from the
that
time
into
that
context, there
it's
was one
manufactured into
13,000 panel
consumer
project
product.
going in, which is roughly, about
lives its life
an
cycle
8 or
and then
9
has
megawatt
to
project.
be decommissioned.
And I told the county
recycled,
manager
repurposed.
here that if
And
they
then
they were out
how
of
do we
compliance
get those
for
commodities
about a month and a half, that
from
we
that
could wipe out our
old
entire
unit
county tax
that
levy.
has
So
lived its
it certainly
life
has some teeth,
back
and
into
our goal was
and
to just gain
design
attention,
products
certainly
that
not
incorporate
to educate
recycled
through
plastics,
enforcement.
post-consumer plastics, or
This required
steel,
on
copper
August 1st of
items, and how do we
2022,
how do we
or
get
within
those
30
back
days of the
into the
first sale
actual
of panels,
products
that
going
a
back onto
stewardship
shelves
plan
in
has
retail
to be
stores?
submitted.
And
And there,
so we've been really focused on
you're
that.
familiar with stewardship
I
plans,
want
but
to
we're looking
focus on
for
a
that
couple of areas
funding
here.
mechanism,
This diagram that you see
description of how
really
hazardous
has 4
substances are
quadrants.
controlled,
URT
how they're managed,
operates pretty
recovered.
much in the 2
We
quadrants on the
wanted some
right-hand side that I'm
convenient
going to
take
talk
back
about, and
locations.
then
And
on
looking
the
back on this
left-hand side,
specific
we reach
component,
across the aisle
there are a lot
and
of
talk to the
warranties
manufacturers and
on
have
solar
many
panels. And
conversations
had
with
I
different
been knowledgeable
OEMs
about that, I
and the
think we
products
may
they're
have tweaked that a
designing
little
and
bit.
their
In our
desire
rules
to
and regs, we
to
might.
incorporate these
The
products,
expectation
sometimes
here
for
is that
financial reasons because it's
solar
going to be
panels aren't,
cheaper, or they think
they're
it's
not
going
like
to
your
be
home
cheaper.
computer,
Others
right? You're not going to
because they really
unplug them
want
off
to
your roof and,
take their
take
products,
them
their old
to
products,
Lowe's or
and
Home Depot or
decommission them,
HHW facility,
recycle them,
and have them
demanufacture them,
recovered.
and
You
then
might, but
reuse
it's
those
likely not going to
exact same
happen
commodities
because
in
of
their
a
products
warranty.
because they think
And many of
that's
these
the best thing to do for the
panels
environment.
are warranted
So we have all of
for,
those
like I said,
conversations.
15, 20, or 25 years.
If we look,
And we
look
have
on the top right,
a energy authority
this
here
is
called
the
NYSERDA,
first
and they
quadrant
handle
that's
all of
highlighted
our
here. It's
alternate
turned
energy
so it's
projects
easier
in the
to
state.
read.
And they have a requirement
But once
that a
a
tier
unit
1
has
panel cannot degrade more than
lived its
1%
useful
per
life,
year for 20
then
years.
some of
So
that is
if
going
these
to have
panels
data
are
on it. How does
80%
that
efficient
data
on day
handled?
1,
And URT
year 1,
has certifications
day 1 of
with
year
regards to
21, they
that,
cannot
and we
be
handle the security
any
piece
less.
and the
It can only
data
be
piece,
20% less efficient than
the
day 1.
demanufacturing, and then
We have performance
build to
goals
design.
requiring 100%
And
recovery, so
basically that
1
means
panel in
how can
and 1
we
panel out by
really
2026.
decommission and recycle
We're
that
requesting that
specific item,
85%,
and
or
in this
requiring
case
that
solar panels. How do we
85%
recycle that
recycling
solar panel
of the
and
panel
tear it
itself
apart
is achieved by
to give us the
2031.
best opportunity
We
to
looked
then
at
reuse
Europe
the
a lot. In
commodities
Europe,
if
based upon
the
how
unit
their
itself
law
can't
was
be used as a
written,
whole.
had struggled with
And so
how
we have
much
those
is
conversations. We
recycled,
have
and that had a lot to do with
several
what was
pieces of
included. So
equipment
we'd
in our
sought
facilities. We have full
to try to
shred
tighten
lines
that up a little bit.
you can
We
take
ask that
the
the manufacturers provide a sufficient financial reserve
automate
and
everything
submit us annual
that comes out
reports.
afterwards from the plastic and the steel and the copper.
Just
and
real
circuit
quick,
work.
and again,
And then,
not being totally familiar with
get
how
a good quality
Vermont
control on that.
projects work,
And then taking
but
those products
there's decommissioning
and
here in New York,
processing them,
and
reusing them, creating
depending
a
on who the
clean
project
commodity
is funded
to
through
then
or by,
to then remarket
decommissioning could or
to
could not be
the
required.
OEMs
If
and
you're
the
doing a private
manufacturers.
land lease, I'm a
So,
farmer in a
taking
rural
this process
community,
that
and
we have
leasing 200 acres.
and
That is
really
a
reincorporating
business
those
agreement
commodities,
that happens
solar
outside of
panels,
Niagara
being the
County. Niagara
glass,
County
the
has no
wafer,
input
the
in that.
aluminum. How do we get
And
those back into the
decommissioning may or may
market
not be a
and
priority.
reuse and recycle
What
every single piece
what I have
of
seen
those
is that
solar panels that are
as
coming to
costs
us?
become tighter,
And
profit margins
just
tighten up as
and
well.
Don kind of
Decommissioning is one of
mentioned
those
some
things
of
that
these,
fall
but
out.
these are really
So,
nationwide.
as a
and
means
this
to,
was,
again, protect the
a
long-term
report that
environmental
EPA put out,
integrity of our
recently.
community, we looked to
And
EPR.
so
So
statistics
decommissioning
here. I don't
could
want
very
to
well
dive
happen.
too much into it, but
EPR
basically
is
the
almost like a
statistics
belt
here
and
are telling
suspenders
us that
approach
solar
to making
panel,
sure
we all
that
know,
the
is
land
on the
is
rise,
restored and
right?
the panels are
Solar
recovered
generation is
and
on the
recycled.
rise, and by how much in the U.S.
And there's an abandonment
really,
clause too.
Again, going back to Don's comments
in
with the
NYSERDA's
county, they
law.
have several
And
large
again,
projects that
looking
they're
at it from the belt
implementing
and
there and
suspenders
installing
approach,
there. But
if
what
the
happens at the end of
manufacturer or
life
the
of
producer
these
of these
things?
solar
And,
panels is on the hook
is
on
the
day
end of
1,
life
it
25
makes
years?
sure
Is it
that we
50
do not
years?
have any abandoned solar fields, which we actually do
It
have,
really,
not a
like she
lot, but
said,
a
depends
few
on
of those
which
projects here in
publication
Niagara
or
County.
article you're reading at the time. And
And
so
we do have our
the
implementation
power
challenges
generation from solar
with
panels
this
is increasing,
local
and it
law.
is the fastest growing
As you can imagine, being
source of
tiny Niagara
electricity in the
County,
U.S.
in
And
the most
URT
western part of New York
obviously
State,
wants to be a
reaching out
solution for
internationally
those
is a
items.
challenge.
Once those
To date,
panels come into
we've
our
had one plan
facilities,
submitted, which truthfully
really,
is one more
you
plan
know,
than
we
I
work
thought
with
we
a
would get.
couple of local
We're
players
doing
in
a
Niagara
tremendous amount
County
of
for their
outreach
project specifically,
through our installers.
for collecting them,
And
because
the
we do not
installers
have
initially
a
were
physical
less
presence in the
than
county.
enthusiastic about
But
this
we have
approach.
companies that we work with
But as
in
we've
other
worked with our
areas
local
as well
governments
that
here
do
who
have
are
a
issuing
physical
building
presence
permits
that
from anything from a
we team up
residential
with and we
project
partner with,
up
and
to a
they do
20 megawatt
they're
utility
going to
grade
do the
project,
actual collection of the
they have become
panels.
partners in this with us and
And
have shared with
in
those seeking building
the
permits that they
EPR
need
program
to
in Niagara,
have their
the
manufacturers on board. So
most difficult piece
today
of
I've held
that
2
from a
calls
processor standpoint,
just
from
today
our
and last
from our
week, probably
viewpoint,
half a dozen calls
really is
with various
that
installers looking for
each
information and
manufacturer is
input.
responsible for their own panels.
It's
So unlike
instrumental,
most
in
of
my opinion, to
the,
have
and I'm
project
gonna say
knowledge
unlike
at the
most
building
because Maine
permit
is the
phase.
exception, but
And
unlike most of
I've kind
the
of classified
electronics
the projects
bills,
into 2 groups. One is those that are in the
manufacturer is
queue.
just
These
responsible
are
for
projects that have
collecting
been in
X number
development,
of
maybe for
pounds
the last couple of months,
electronics. It
signing
doesn't
plans,
matter what
lease
manufacturer
agreements,
it is.
land
It
has
doesn't
been
matter,
purchased, things of that
if they're
nature.
only manufacturing TVs
Or
and they
projects
collect,
that are, proposed and they're looking
tablets
to
or
get all the
computers or
nuts and
printers,
bolts
that still counts.
scraped together.
So when you
For
get
those
to a
projects that are in the
scenario where you
queue,
have to,
we're doing
where
our
you
best
require each
to
manufacturer
be
to collect
forgiving
only their
and
panels,
I don't want
obviously
to
they're
say
not interested
lenient, but
in
to
recycling
host as many
somebody
calls as we
else's
can
panels.
and
So how do you set up a
and
network
share
where
the
you're not
intent
getting
of the local
dumped,
law, and it's
where you're
sometimes
not
met with
getting
animosity,
solar
most
panels
times
that
met with animosity by
URT,
installers,
for example, or
but
our
other
partner
times it's
right now, one of
positive
our
and
partners,
productive.
LG, is not
We've been
responsible
called a
for
lot of
collecting
things
Panasonic
in
panels
Niagara County here,
or
and related to this
Q
project, we've been called
cells or
anti-solar
anything like that.
with this,
How do you
which
set
is
up a
unfortunate
network and
because, as I
a
said, with the
system
ugly environmental
that
history
prevents you
that we have here in this
from then
community
having panels
and the plethora of
that
waste that is
you have to dispose
anticipated.
of yourself as the processor.
And as green as the industry is, it's a bit of a shame
So that is
that
the most
we're
difficult
not able to
step
close the loop
and piece of the law
on
in
this,
Niagara for us.
cradle to
Again,
grave
we work with that
sort
in
of
Maine. We're
mentality here
familiar with that,
with these solar panels.
and we've come up with a solution. And then
we're working
to
to ensure
collectors there in the area will
compliance.
ship those up to us.
Our
in
data that
Dover,
is
New
provided
Hampshire.
by the state, which is
And
nice.
once it arrives at our facility,
It tracks
the
quite a
first
bit.
process,
It provides
obviously,
us with
after
the panels
having
and the
those
make and
received
model,
and weighed in,
and afforded us the
is,
opportunity to reach out to
the panels
these
do go through a
international
shredder.
companies.
And
all letters
the
have
whole
been
point
sent to
of
the over 40
shredder is
manufacturers
to
that we
reduce
have
the size
in use in our community.
and
Truthfully,
separate
not
the material,
with the
the different
exception of
commodities.
one being LG.
After
Others have not
it goes through a
responded. A lot of
shredder,
our
there is a
outreach
magnet.
has
Now
gone through
most
the
solar panels do
installers
not have
and
any
reversing
steel on
that
them,
supply chain.
so the magnet comes
We're
up clean most
working
of the
with our
time.
local governments at the
But then it
building
runs through an eddy
permit
current,
phase.
and
But the challenge there is that they are
100%
not
focus of
required to enforce our local law. They can
the
certainly
eddy current
advise,
is
and if
to
the community
separate
desires
out the
to
aluminum.
issue a building
So the
permit for a
aluminum
project, they
frame
certainly can.
comes out and
And
it's
then
pretty clean.
we'll
It's
have to
separated
take up
from the glass
compliance
and the
later
panel
on.
itself.
As a matter of fact, tomorrow
So
on our
here
legislative
you can
agenda,
see
we
that the
are
aluminum
passing some
then goes straight
regulations
to
for
the
this local
manufacturing
law
process. It's
that
a very
will
clean
kind of shore
product.
up
There's nothing else that needs to be
our
done to
enforcement
process that
component.
material. We
It
have
will allow
several
us to issue a notice of
aluminum
violation
manufacturers and
to the
smelters
manufacturer
that we
for any
work with
projects
directly.
with that the panels are installed,
So then on the other
and allow
half
them a
of the
specific
material,
period of
then
time,
here goes through
an
a
opportunity
hammer
to
mill,
appeal.
which again is a size
And as a last
reduction
resort, Niagara
mechanism.
County can
And
get an
that's 100.
injunction
That's
to
all it
halt the
does. Is
project.
it just reduces
Which,
the size.
getting back
Coming
to
through
that
the
sharp
shredder,
teeth,
everything's
we have
2
$100 per
inches
panel
or
per
smaller.
day, and then we can ultimately
Going
halt
through
the
the hammer
project.
mill, it is
It's
essentially
it's walking around with that big stick and to be intimidating and say pay
then it
attention
goes
to us
through the
because of
gravity
this, but
table. Now the
it's certainly
gravity
not our
table is
ambition
able
to have to educate and enforce in that
for
manner.
lack
We're
of
just
better
looking
term,
for
if you don't know what a
compliance.
gravity table is, it's really a bouncing table that has a bunch of little holes in it.
And that's about a summary
And
of it.
the
So I
heavier
can
product will fall through
certainly
the holes,
stop
and the
sharing my
lighter
screen
product
here
will
and
continue along the
entertain any
surface of the
questions.
gravity table.
Don,
And that's where we
hi,
separate out
I
the
just wanted
wafer
to ask,
from the
were
glass.
the installers in
And
favor when you were
the
working on
glass
this
and the
legislation
wafers
at that
then
point?
are able to be reused.
That's an excellent question.
The wafer
We
itself
held
comes
multiple, or
out.
excuse
It
me,
does
we
come
held
out
one
also
public
with
hearing
the copper wires
about the
and
local law,
the
which was
little bit of
required,
circuit board
and
that we do
had
find in
several
some of
meetings.
the
And
inverters that go
at no
through
point
as
in
well.
time did any
All of that
installer or
material
anyone
comes
from the
out,
community come out and
what we
for
call as
or
the
against
wafer product.
at
That
least
is-
installers,
that then goes to a
manufacturers
copper
for or
smelter,
against
where the
the
silver,
local law. We did,
the
however,
copper,
there's a group I
and a
mentioned,
few other
the
trace
Bear Ridge
elements are
project, which is right in the
recovered
heart of Niagara County.
from that process.
There is a group
the
in that
glass is
community
diverted
that
into a different channel,
that
and the
opposes
glass will
the
go into
industrial
a
grade
mix of
or
process with
utility
our
grade
CRT
project going
glass,
in that community. And they are very much
and
a
that
vocal
will
in
head
support,
to
which
a
is not a group I'm
manufacturer
really
for
looking for
tiles,
support from, but
for
those
industrial
are the
grade
only folks that
tiles.
really had responded.
And we have
So
that
they
process with our
really didn't
CRT glass
need
has been
all of
in
them.
place for
Not at all, but
10 years.
you know, a lot of that
probably.
could be size. This
maybe
is
not
this
quite
is
that
just
long
Niagara County,
for
and
with our current,
you know, as
with our
much as we
current
tried to wave
contractor,
our
but,
flag of what we're
the
doing
tiles
here
is
on a global scale,
an
we're
outlet that we have for all of our
we're
products
just a little pinhole.
for glass.
Yeah, it'll be interesting,
And,
it's just interesting to
so
think about, because here in Vermont,
that
the
allows
installers
that
are who
is
have
our
approached,
process and what happens
public
at our
service and
facility.
also us. Not all of
I
them.
know
and
that
don't
there
know
was
that they're
probably some
necessarily in
questions
favor of
about
EPR,
that, but
they want a solution
that
for
is
these
our current
end of
process.
life too, or the
Right
ones that
now,
break on the
if we
job,
include the waste to
Mhm.
energy, which,
So yeah.
and the reason I bring
That's
that
interesting,
up is,
and you know,
if you look
from what I'm
here,
learning from the warranty
if we
period,
look in this category
as
right here,
that
there is still some glass that
NYSERDA has
comes out
set
here into
requirements
this
that for the
mix.
first 5
That
years of
glass
a
at the
project,
smelter is
that the
used as a
installer has
heating
to
source.
warranty the install. That if
They
anything happens,
actually
the
are
panel
able
breaks,
to
you know,
use that,
the
and
wiring's
it
faulty,
actually
what
burns
have
very
you,
hot,
they
and
have
they're
to
able to
repair it on their own nickel.
create
You know, day
not
one
electricity
of
but heat for
year
their
6,
furnaces in order to recover
they can go back
the
to the
other commodities that
manufacturer.
they look for
And
from
some
the smelter.
manufacturers are better than others.
So
Some
if we
installers have
include
shared
that
with
little
me,
bit of
you know,
glass
they've
that
got their
does head over
favorites
to
and
the
they tend to
smelter,
use.
100% of our
What
panels are
throws a
recycled.
big boondoggle in all of this
And
is that it's about supply chain.
we
For some of the
really
smaller
look
projects, and you know,
to
when I say
the next
smaller, I'm
step in
thinking
our
like,
process,
you
going
know,
back
a
to our
5
circular
megawatt
economy,
and,
would
you know,
really be
in smaller down to your, you know,
find
residential
a
or
solar
barn panels.
manufacturer that's interested in
They take what's next on the
the
shelf.
glass, is
You know,
interested in
they're looking,
the copper
their
and
models
silver that are
are
recovered and
based
those sorts
on
of things.
what
So
is
then we
readily
could then
available,
close that loop and
and
incorporate
not
those
so
right
much
back
on the
into
efficiency
the
of it.
manufacturing process.
Whereas
for
the
solar panels.
larger projects, of course,
Ray,
are,
Ray, I have a quick question
have
for
much
you.
more, many more
John
panels,
Kelly's,
much more buying
solid
power
waste
behind them.
program in Vermont.
And
Do you
it's putting
any
a bit
panels
of a
for
burden and a
reuse?
responsibility, an undue
So right now,
responsibility
we
on
do not have
installers.
any
But
for reuse.
the drum we keep beating here
Most
is
of our
just
programs,
keep going
and this is
back to your
nationwide,
retailers, your
we do not
distributors, and
have
whoever, and have them
a
call me,
contract for
and we can talk,
large
and
scale
we can try to sort this out.
utility.
So what we're
utility
seeing
fields,
is
right?
instead
The
of
solar fields
manufacturers
that
coming to
have
us with
thousands of
plans,
panels.
it is
Really,
installers on
to
specific
see what we
projects saying,
see and the
can we
panels
try
that are
this?
coming
And
off
what they
of
want to try,
residential
we have yet to
homes
approve it yet,
really are end of
is
life.
they want to
Not a whole lot of
create
reuse
almost like a
left in them.
stewardship.
Now, having said that, it is our
stewardship
desire
organization
and
for the
our
panels
goal
for
to
that
get
project
into
that
the
they're
reuse
installing.
market for solar
And
panels. In order
it remains
to
to
do
be
that,
seen.
we need to
The
have
last 5 calls I've had with
newer panels are
installers,
always
4 of
better,
them have brought that
but
up.
also quantity
So it's another
of
unique
similar
approach
of the same
where
model
installers who we
is
purposely
paramount when
kept
you're
out of
trying to
responsibility
remarket
are
those
assuming
panels.
responsibility so they
Instead
can
of,
continue
nobody
projects.
wants 1 or 2 panels.
Wow.
They want to
All
use
right. Lot of
large
layers.
numbers of panels for, whether
And how would
that's
they fund
for
those,
stocking in
Dawn?
case
How
something
would
does
the
happen to their
installers
current
fund
functional
those
solar
product
field,
stewardship
that they have some
organizations?
spares on hand.
I have
And when I
yet
say
to
spares,
see
they're
it.
looking for hundreds,
However,
sometimes
just
thousands of
this
panels
morning's call,
to have in hand
the
just in
gentleman
case a
indicated that it would be
hailstorm comes
part
through
of
or
his
something like that.
decommissioning plan. That
So
instead
to answer
of
the question,
just posting a
simply
bond
no,
for
we do not
decommissioning,
currently
which, like I
work
said,
in
is
that
or is
market,
not
but it is a
required
goal of
depending on the
ours.
size of the project,
Thanks.
that they will post that
Hey, where are
bond
the
and then
smelters
build in the
located that you all
requirements
are
of
working
our
on?
local
Are
law
they-
into it,
that's
so
different.
that the panels
It
would
depends
have
on which commodity. So
an
I'll
adequate
go
funding
back here.
mechanism to manage them
It
at
depends
the
on
end
which
of
of the
life,
commodities
after
you're
warranty, and would
looking
be
for.
transferable. So those
The
are the things
aluminum
that we would look
smelters
for.
are mostly here
Oh,
in North
that's
America.
Is there anybody
The tile
on
manufacturing happens
virtually that
mostly
would like
in
to ask a
Brazil.
question?
That's our primary, and I would probably say
John
98% of
Gilkison
our product goes there.
Has his hand up.
For the
Yes.
wafer material, which
Thank
would
you,
be,
Dawn, for
which would be this material
talking with
here. here.
Vermont today, and thank you,
We have
Vermont,
several
for inviting me
smelters
to
that
participate.
we work with
I've been working on
nationwide,
a
or I should say
stakeholder
worldwide. One
discussion
is
here in
Canada,
Minnesota with my
Glencore.
colleague Amanda Cotton,
There's
who
a
couldn't
couple in
make it
Japan
today.
that we also work with.
And Dawn, I've toured
Mitsubishi
Love
being one
Canal
of
and other
those,
sites,
another
and you know,
company
all
called
of us
Dowa
are responsible
that
for
we
what
work
you
with,
have there. We
and
were
they're
all
the
buying
copper
those
smelters.
products that
There
were
are
made with
no
those
primary
things.
copper
So
smelters in the United States.
we should be sharing the
and
responsibility.
there's the one in Canada.
Anyways, one question I wanted to ask you, Dawn, is when we are talking with our statewide
Did you say
social
that
solar
inverters,
energy
you sometimes get those
association and
too?
some national
We do.
folks who do
The
utilities
little inverter
scale
boxes
or private
that's, connect to the
large
back
scale
of the
stuff around the
panels, the
country,
wires,
and their
you know, the
allegation
wires that go
is
in there
that
as well.
this was put in
we-
place to stop
No,
solar
not the big ones.
installation in
And
Niagara
then,
County.
so the
And,
silica itself,
obviously that's
is that
not
going with the, that's part of the
what's
wafer,
happening,
right?
but how would you
It is
respond
part
to
of the
that?
wafer, yes.
And how
And-
do you, yeah,
But
how do you
that would
respond
be
to that
spent, right?
to
So-
dispel that notion?
It is spent,
and
yes.
You said
steer in a
everything's
different direction, the
recycled,
idea.
so
Everything.
No, it's an
the-
excellent
the
question, and
silicon-
it's one
the
that
silicon
I'm
as
often
well
met
as the
with,
glass are
as you
used
can
for heating.
imagine. And
would
to make
be-
matters a
the
little bit more
silicon,
complicated
if there
for
was a
me in
way that-
implementing this
that
law
we
is
could
that there are
extract, separate,
individuals within
remove
specific
the
communities
silicon
or even
from the
legislators
glass
in
better,
Niagara
and,
County government
you know,
that
I
may have
do
voted for
believe
this that
eventually that
are not
technology will
necessarily
be
in
available.
support of
Right now,
specific
there's
projects,
just not
whether
a
those
way
projects are
to
in
remove the silicon from the wafer to
whether
be able
those
to
projects are in
recycle
local
that
farm fields.
independently.
I lost my train of thought for a second. Excuse me
Yeah,
for
I've
one
heard
second.
some of the foreign presentations, and they said that's the biggest issue, but as far as the glass,
right,
then when it's made.
I'm sorry,
into
we had
tile,
local
the
legislators
tile
that
itself can't be recycled.
were
Correct.
would speak out against some of the large utility grade projects
Correct.
that
The
were
tile
in
itself
communities. And
is-
ultimately, you know,
I mean, it would
that's
just
what
be
an
like any other
installer
tile
on a
that,
national level
the
will
tiles
see.
that you have in your house, but these
And,
are big industrial grade
when
tiles.
we're having
that-
these
that they
meetings
use
with them, that's
typically
the
in
first thing they'll say to me. Well, you know,
warehouse spaces.
legislator X, Y, and Z or
Okay.
town
but
supervisor, you know,
yes, they would.
ABC
There's not a
is
process
coming
to
out as
recycle those at the
anti-solar.
moment either.
My response to that ultimately becomes that that's not the intent
Any
of the law.
questions,
The intent of the law is
from
to protect the long-term
virtual?
environmental integrity of our community.
John's
And
got
we
his
have the
hand up.
legacy behind us to prove that had EPR
Okay,
laws
thank you very
existed
much
in the
for
first
your,
place, we wouldn't be on the hook for places like the Love Canal.
my microphone's at the top of my head. That's better.
Thanks.
Thanks for the
That's good.
presentation. We have very different
a couple of
decommissioning
questions,
set of requirements and local approvals. So I can't
the-
really draw any
The
analogies,
Niagara
but we're
County
trying to-
law allows
the
a stewardship
utility
organization
scale
to
is
be
kind of
formed
covered
and-
through decommissioning requirements and everything
run
under
on
50
behalf of
megawatts
numerous
is manufacturers, but with individual
like the issue
counties
is that
having to make all the
nobody's-
decisions.
Nobody's
for
doing that. It's only
siting, and LG has come forward
approvals
to actually
and-
take some
and,
responsibility. Is that correct? Bonding for removal
Yeah,
end
that
of
would
life.
be a
So
question directly
interesting
for
to hear what
Dawn,
you
but
have.
I
It's
do believe, I
covers-
think she
you
said that
cover a little
earlier in
bit
her
more than we do.
presentation. I don't want to put words in her
And
mouth.
so you
Yeah.
said
And it is the
communities are on the hook
only
for under 50
manufacturer that we
megawatt.
have actually signed. an
Communities are
agreement with as
totally in
well.
charge of approving
And we are in
and
talks with several, but
citing requirements
only
for
ones
any
that
installation under 50
have
megawatts and
put
decommissioning.
together a
There's
plan
no
and actually
decommissioning
submitted it.
framework for solar under 50 megawatts. And my second question was about the glass
Interesting.
component.
Okay.
You're
So the
mixing it
Office
with
of
CRT
Renewable
glass
Energy
instead of for
Services
tile.
here takes over
We've
at
been told that's
25
extraordinarily
megawatts.
high quality
And you know,
iron-free
they
glass
effectively
that
negotiate
unfortunately
and bargain
comes
all
comes out of the process
and have cut
contaminated,
out
but it seems like
what we call here in
kind
New
of a
York
down
the home
cycle
rule.
to
So that
to
Article
mix it with CRT
10
glass for tiles. Are there
procedure,
other
which
markets you
had a very storied history of
available? Are
dragging
there
out
other
projects.
technical issues that
And due to that
prevent
length
that
of
from
time,
happening?
investors weren't necessarily
So
attracted to them.
there are
And shortening that
technically
up
right now
for
most
you know,
of the
for a variety of
high-grade
reasons, but
glass.
a lot of the communities are feeling that they do
reuse
not have a say.
processes,
So you know,
it
we
needs
also
to be
are right for
contaminant-free,
offshore wind
and
here.
it's, you know,
With our shoreline
99.9%
along Lake Ontario,
contaminant-free.
the Niagara
Our
River,
process does not
and
lend
you know,
itself to that
it becomes a
currently.
concern. So it's kind of like
but
the collision of
again,
you know,
as
the state's ambitious
continually
alternate
improve
energy
our
goals,
process, our goal would be to
and
utilize
you know the
glass
the
from
policy
solar
put in
panels.
place to
You know, having that
to
glass
see
go
that
directly
through.
into new solar panels.
And then
would
you have
be
communities
ideal
such as
for us,
Niagara
and
County,
what
you bring
our
find residents,
end
you know,
goal
on
would be.
different sides of the fence with that.
Um,
And it's great
just
for some
not there
farmers, and
yet.
don't get me wrong, some farmers
Yeah,
are
And so, you know,
are
that
aging and looking
glass
for an
is
opportunity
a
for
higher
a steady
quality,
revenue
like
source
you
and find
said,
that, you know, a
than
land
the
lease
CRT
for a solar
glass.
installation is
Obviously,
far
the
easier
tile
than
the tile
you know,
manufacturers
than
love
managing a
the
field.
fact that it goes in with that, and it actually improves the quality of their
But the
tiles.
neighbors don't like it, and then
But
it
at the
just
same time,
becomes a vicious
there
circle.
would hopefully be better uses
Thanks.
for that down the road.
Or planting 40 acres of walnuts. That
Thanks.
used to be the other strategy.
Any other questions? Oh,
Anyone
Anyone else before we
What
move
kind
on?
of characterization have you done on the incoming tiles, or do you
Dawn,
require it to
thank
be
you
done by
so
the
much
generator?
for sticking with us and changing your schedule
On
around.
the tiles
Appreciate
that are
it
being
so much.
manufactured?
And,
Of course.
No, on the
All right, good
incoming
luck.
waste to your
Thank
facility.
you.
that
Take care,
are
everybody.
not accepting hazardous waste.
Got it. So from our standpoint, from a URT standpoint, everything is done on a visual inspection, and we do air monitoring and tests that are required from our eStewards certification. I'm not sure if that really answers your question. We don't do an individual sampling of individual products coming in with every shipment, that sort of thing. And we stay away from hazardous waste. We don't bring hazardous waste into our facilities. And if we do, if it does happen on accident, we require the company to come back and pick it up.
I think Phoebe had her hand up.
I was also going to ask about hazardous waste, but Barb beat me to it.
Yeah.
And I
okay.
just wanted to add, Ray, that was a really great presentation. I love learning more about the recycling process for solar.
Yeah, great.
John, did you have another question?
No, I was trying to figure out how to turn that off.
Okay, we'll just pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Ray, can I ask you, I don't know if you said this, I apologize, plastics, there's a lot of plastics on the wire cover, there's some plastics that come in with this stuff. You know, I know it sounds good to say everything's recycled, but we have to be honest that some of it is what you're calling incineration, which is just replacing another incinerated product. But so we can parse words there, but can you talk about plastics a bit?
Do you want to talk about the plastics with the solar panels, or you want to talk about plastics in general?
Well, either if you're willing, briefly.
Yeah. So you are correct. The insulation for the wires, the plastic case on the inverter, those sorts of things do fall. And I'm going to go back to my diagram here. Those products do fall here into this mix, which are then used for heating, right? Waste to energy. Now, if you want to talk about plastics in general, URT actually does have a plastic separation process in our Beloit Avenue, Wisconsin facility. Again, that's in Janesville, but we are very dedicated to the plastic separation and creating plastics that are separated, that are high enough quality that they can stay domestically. You know, again, without mincing words, most of the plastic that is generated from e-waste in the U.S. does end up overseas to be separated and then reused. Our goal, along with BAN, the Basel Action Network, for those of you who don't know, is to be able to recycle all of our plastics domestically. And in order to be able to do that, we have to be able to sort them into their different polymers here stateside as well. So URT has created a process in Wisconsin where we take the mixture of plastics, because you can imagine consumer electronics have all kinds of different polymers, different types of plastics. And when it's shredded, obviously that plastic, the process is automated, but all of the plastic essentially comes out together in one big mix. And then we are able to take that mix and run it through our plastic separation system, which a big portion of that is a sink float system, where we're able to sink and float different types of plastic based on the salinity of the water that it goes through, and create pure grades of plastic and different polymers. And we have actually committed in 2023 to introduce that process into our Texas facility as well, due to the volumes of product that we have there, and to be able to increase the capacity at both facilities, and as well as increasing the capacity, be able to sort out different polymers as well. So all of those things are things that URT has done, but you know, and I apologize, I don't know your name that asked the question. Plastics are a headache in the recycling industry, especially in the consumer electronic and the solar panel, and you know, all the things that we manage. They are just, you know, there's no uniform, hey, all of this is ABS plastic, it's great, you know, let's just shred it up and we'll clean it up a little bit and be able to sell it right back into the market. It's every imaginable plastic that is out there is in consumer electronics and the products that we see, and therefore, how do we manage that the best of our ability?
Totally respect. Thanks, Ray. And Josh Kelly, by the way, thanks.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Josh.
Ray Zelke, did I get that right?
Yes, yes.
My brain just automatically went to the other.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much. We appreciate you. We thank you for all that you do for the state already. And I'm gonna move on. If there's no other questions, can you turn the recording off at this point?
Yeah.
And stop recording down there with the red dot.